Atoms for Peace program by President Eisenhower in 1953 was to create a nice, pleasant, friendly image for a technology that just most frightening technology in the world. And as we know, Japan is the only country where the atomic bomb was dropped in a war and just massacred tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people instantaneously. And, you know, oddly enough, the first demonstration I went to in 1958, when I was about this tall, was a commemoration of the Hiroshima bombing. And I don't know, a friend and I went and we heard some nuclear energy and the bomb. And so this is something I've been interested in. What I'd like you to do is, what I'd like to start off with is read a little bit so you see the way nuclear power was sold to people. Atoms for Peace was sold to the people as a it seemed to be a technology without flaw. And here's a quote from an article from the Ladies' Home Journal in 1953 by Harold Stassen, who was Eisenhower's special assistant on disarmament. And what he wrote was, "The world of the future can use nuclear energy, will create for us would be a world in which there is no disease, where hunger is unknown, where food never rots and crops never spoil, where dirt is an old-fashioned word and routine household tasks are just a matter of pushing a few buttons." Listen to that, you ladies. Anyway, and husbands who do a little housework sometimes. A world where no one stokes a furnace or curses the smog, where the air is everywhere as fresh as on a mountaintop, and the breeze from a factory is as sweet as from a rose. And anyway, we found an old comic book called Our Friend the Atom, which was in the junior high school library in the city of Davis. And I guess they were throwing it out, but my wife has a very sharp eye. She picked it up, and she says, here was one of what they do is, with every new technology that comes along, and it can be communications, it can be pesticides, it can be nuclear power, but nuclear power is probably the most pernicious. But they make these incredible claims for it. So you think, well, this is going to be the new millennium. And they're trying to get people to focus on these new toys and these new visions of the future and forget about class struggle. Forget about the fact that, you know, in the last 30 or 40 years, the average CEO of a corporation has gone from earning 40 times as much as the average worker to making 400 times as much. And so we have an example here in this, My Friend the Atom. An atomic airplane could circle the Earth many times without landing for fuel. A rocket ship powered by the atom would not have to carry the enormous weight of fuel and would help us cast off the shackles of gravity and fly freely through space. And it goes, atomic powers come just in time because coal and oil are too valuable to burn. The magic power of atomic energy is beginning to work for mankind, etc. So they go on and on. So you kind of get the idea. Now, what happened? I noticed that the Atoms for Peace program started in from what I just saw on the tape, 1954 in Japan. Everything was pretty much lockstep, and in many ways, this is not intended as an insult, but Japan has been more or less somewhat willing at the highest levels and unwilling satellite of the United States, or I would say the military-industrial complex of the United States. They go along with some of these plans, and my understanding is that Fukushima, a lot of the technology came from Westinghouse and General Electric, but you know more than I do about that. And it was basically shoved down the throats of the Japanese, who didn't have, they had to put up with the Americans. I don't know how many bases the Americans, our government still has in Japan, probably 40 or 50. I don't know, many bases in Okinawa. And you can read Chalmers Johnson on that one. Now, what is interesting about it, governments always lie. Big companies always lie when these issues come up for discussions. Just like big governments always lie on the motives for going to war. They almost always lie. And we can think of some examples in the recent past, and probably a number of you were downtown in San Francisco in January and February and March of 2002. It was the first time there were millions of people hitting the streets throughout the world to try to stop a war which everyone could see was going to happen in Iraq, and we weren't able to do it because the people who run things, Bush and his cabal, they pushed it right through. Now, the big lie, and this is the big lie that's being told in Fukushima by the government, no doubt by TEPCO, and by the advocates of nuclear power in the United States, is that very few people are going to die. And so, from exposure to the radiation, from the great disaster that happened with the earthquake and the tsunami. And so, what we have to do to understand this is look in the recent past, and the most frightening, fairly recent incident was, of course, the Chernobyl. The Chernobyl disaster explosion in, what was it, March of 1986. And so, what you have to understand is just as in the United States, the government and the nuclear industry and their friends in the banks were trying to coordinate opinion to say this is a great technology, that it's not dangerous. The same thing was happening at an international level. And this was shown and exposed in great detail in a magnificent work, Chernobyl, which you may have heard of. Chernobyl, Consequences of the Catastrophe for People and the Environment. And it's a longish study of 300 or 400 pages, published originally in Russian, and the major authors are physicist Alexei Yablokov, Alexei Nestorenko, and Yablokov is the Russian Academy of Sciences, a very prominent physicist. Alexei Nestorenko from the Institute of Radiation Safety in Minsk, in Belarus, what used to be called White Russia, and so forth. Anyway, what they point out in this study, and they looked at basically thousands of articles and studies and bits of information, mostly in Russian and Ukrainian, in the Slavic language. And we know that if something is published in Japanese, it wouldn't be as likely to be seen in English because real people speak English. But, you know, other people speak other languages as well. And so here's my point. The International Agency, International Atomic Energy, basically in the beginning of the nuclear age, WHO, the World Health Organization, made some honest, published some honest studies and comments about what could happen if people were exposed to a lot of radiation. But then there was an agreement reached in 1959 between the AIEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and WHO, which is the World Health Organization. These are both organizations affiliated with the United Nations. And they signed an agreement, and here's exactly what it says. Whenever either organization, either WHO or AIEA, the Atomic Energy Agency, or WHO, proposes to initiate a program or activity on a subject in which the other organization has or may have a substantial interest, the first party shall consult the other with a view to adjusting the matter by mutual agreement. What is that about? That means they clear anything they write about health with the agency internationally that's promoting atomic energy. And in the, when the International Atomic Energy Agency was founded, its founding constitution or preamble said, the agency shall seek to accelerate and enlarge the contribution of atomic power to peace, health, and prosperity throughout the world. So basically what they're saying is, they're going to cook the books. They're going to lie if they find something that doesn't work. So in the Chernobyl case, they claimed that the total number of deaths was 14 or 40, and but even after the cancer cases they found out about, supposedly there were only 4,000 cases. And the reason I'm talking about Chernobyl is because everything applies to Fukushima, where the amount of radioactivity in the sea is much higher than in the Baltic Sea or the Black Sea in Europe. Well, they claim that when you looked at the cancers that were caused by Chernobyl, 4,000 people, there were 4,000 excess deaths. Well, the fact is, using what Yablokov and his colleagues found, as far as they could tell, between 1986 and 2004, 986,000 excess deaths up until 2004. That's already, what, 7 years ago. So that's 1 million people. That's 1 million people who died before their time. We don't even talk about, what happened to the environment and the wolves or the animals. So basically, they're going to put out a big lie. Okay, so you say, well, that's an international organization, not important, and maybe a lot of the members don't speak English. Well, what's happened in the United States? Well, if you look at the entire fuel cycle, starting, and we're always told nuclear power is clean and green, and, but it turns out that starting from when they're digging the uranium out of the ground, where about half the miners were Navajo, many of whom did not speak English. It's a huge Navajo nation. It's probably as big as Connecticut and Massachusetts put together. It's a big little country. They were not told as recently as 1960. They've been mining uranium there since the 1940s, and the only customer was the Atomic Energy Commission, because they didn't want the private sector to get into the uranium mining business. They wanted it to be controlled by a secure agency, and they refused to tell these Navajo miners that their health was at risk. Now, what you have to remember when you're looking at these kind of figures and cancer, and I'm not an expert. I have a couple of pieces of paper in something called political science. I'm not a physicist. I'm not a physician, but Larry Rose here, who's a physician, he'll tell you a little more. He's been an inspector with California Occupational Safety and Health Administration. He will tell you a little bit more about this, but here's basically what you have to know about the deaths that will result from exposure to radiation. There's external emitters, and so when they show the Geiger counter, go click, 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 whatever it does, those are external emitters. That's what people were, if the bomb blows up and you're not incinerated right away, you get that immediate radiation. But what kills you and what causes cancer over the years and the decades are internal emitters or hotspots. And we're talking about radioactive cesium-137, plutonium, iodine, uranium-235, strontium-90, little particles, hot spots, get in your body and keep emitting. And somehow they cause the cells to grow in a wild, crazy fashion. We have another word for that. It's called cancer. And that's what gets people. That's what kills them. And Department of Water and Power. The fifth biggest is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And by all accounts, it's the best electric company in California. They're pioneers in solar energy. They spend a lot of money on shade trees. And the top banana, the top person in the agency makes 12 times what the janitor makes. You know what a janitor is? The guy or the gal with the broom. They make $30,000 a year. The top banana makes $320,000, 10 times as much. With Pacific Gas and Electric, the janitor makes maybe $30,000. It's a union job. The top banana makes between $10 million and $34 million. So they make 1,000 times as much, okay? Because it's a capitalist enterprise, even though they are guaranteed 11.3% profit on their investment, because they have something called the Public Utilities Commission. And I know something about this. I actually used to be an employee at the Public Utilities Commission. So anyway, what we decided to do, we decided to try to kick Pacific Gas and Electric out of Yolo County, out of the 72,000 electric meters in the cities of Davis, West Sac, and Yolo. We worked and worked and worked. We did door to door. We didn't win this time. We may do it again. We may try to do it again. But Pacific Gas and Electric spent, by their own account, $15 million on a local election to beat us. Imagine 130,000 people voting. They spent $15 million. And then, in June, so then they decided it's too easy to go from private to public ownership. You just have to get a majority of the people. Even though our side doesn't have very much money. They spent $100 for every dollar we spent. So they ran a statewide initiative called Prop 16. In June of 2010, they spent $45 million, but they lost. Our side spent $100,000. They spent $45 million. We beat them. We beat them, okay? They tried to make it impossible to go from private to public ownership, the reverse of what you're supposed to do in this world today, right? And so people understood, and the strange thing about the election results was everywhere Pacific Gas and Electric had customers, they lost, even in Bakersfield. In Davis, everybody says, oh, Bakersfield is, I don't want to use any words we don't want to have quoted, but Bakersfield is less, quote-unquote, enlightened than the wonderful, brilliant people of San Francisco or Davis. And they haven't been to as many university classes, but they understood. 58% of them voted no when they were trying to take the right to go from private to public ownership way. In Davis, the no vote was 79%. So we think there's a constituency. We think there's a chance. And there's another word they use for an organization like that. It's like another word they could use for the public schools. But don't say it too loud. Socialism. Socialism. Socialism, right? It's, you know, it's run by the people, for the people. And we think there's a future in it. But it ain't going to be easy. Okay? And